Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Solid Ground. Lovely to have all the regulars back. I can see you already coming online in the comments. And to those who are new, perhaps have just stumbled across this, across the myriad of platforms that we broadcast, welcome to Solid Ground with me, Simon O'Connor, one of the Family First shows, an unapologetically conservative and Christian worldview, where we sit down here on, Solid Ground on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and with Bob on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and we look at the current events happening around New Zealand and around the world, and we look at them from what we believe is a good solid ground, there's the pun, including, of course, solid ground always can include a cup of coffee, of faith, of politics, of culture, of ethics, and of faith. And look, there is never a shortage of topics to discuss. In fact, it's one of the funniest things for me. When I finish a show, it's like a clean slate, a tabula rasa, as you will. And so it's like a clean slate, and then it's like, oh gosh, what am I going to talk about on the next show? But I can tell you, by the time I get to Tuesday morning, like today, or Thursday, even when we do political playback on a Thursday, we are absolutely pumping. We are pumping, and this morning is no different. But very quickly, good morning. I can see, as regulars will know, I like to spend just a short few moments saying g'day to people, because this is a live show. This is where your comments from the Family First Facebook page and its YouTube channel, that's really important. All comments I get to see, so if you're on my LinkedIn page or you've seen this on Substack, Instagram, TikTok, fantastic. But if you want to comment live, if you want to see those comments come to me while I'm here in the studio, go on to Family First YouTube or Facebook page. And like Lynette, where's my buttons, gets to tell me good morning. Mike as well, I see, good morning. If I'm clicking the right buttons here. Darren, lovely to have you along. Food Dogs Trucking, who never just says good morning, but it is a jolly good morning. And I have to say it is, even here in Auckland, that's where I'm broadcasting from. It's a bit windy, but actually quite nice out there. Good morning to Nigel. We've got Jackie as well. NZ Knitter. Oh, Rachel, of course, as I now know. Lisa, lovely to have you along. Strong and him, always a pleasure to have you along. As to Pat, good morning and welcome. I better stop there. Oh, we've got, every time I say that, someone else pops on. Pamela, lovely to have you along. And everyone else who is commenting, great to have you here. I wanted to start with something I thought was somewhat funny. And it's to do with an American politician. His name is James Tallarico. You may have come across him. I know Bob has talked about him. He's a relatively young, very left-wing politician in the state of Texas. He sits in the Texas House of Representatives, like the lower house or the House of Commons. But he's running for the seat of Texas, which in itself is interesting. But what is most striking about this guy, and I don't have clips of him, he is someone who claims abortion is fine. He is an absolute advocate for the LGBTIQ plus excesses. I want to stress that. He's woke. He is more woke than you could think. As I say, exceptionally pro-death. And he's been on television because he trained at some, I think, Presbyterians, I was going to say cemetery, that's terrible, seminary. So he makes a big claim about his Christian faith. Which I suppose he's free to do so, except that his Christian faith doesn't actually accord with Christian values, as I say, particularly in the area of life. He's very dismissive, so he's become somewhat infamous for going around saying that abortion is fine because it's mentioned nowhere in the Bible. And I thought I would just address that very quickly, not so much him in particular, even the particular argument around abortion. I just thought this was funny from a satirical site called the Babylon Bee, which for me sums up the problem with the argument of anyone you come across, particularly within the Christian framework, who claims to be a Christian, but is saying, oh, well, the Bible doesn't say X, Y, and Z. I think the Babylon Bee sums this up perfectly, as it says there. This James Tallarico, this Democratic pro-abortion candidate, says, well, there's nothing in the Bible about drop kicking a labradoodle, which is true. Now, obviously, we're not here at Family First to support anyone drop kicking any animal, but it just begins to show the absurdity of that argument. It's an argument, I'm sad to say, that gets indulged a lot by mainstream media. I've had it myself. Oh, where, Simon, does it say this? Where does it say that in the Bible? It doesn't need to. It doesn't need to explicitly. The Bible is a guide, of course, for Christians, the inspired word of God. But it's not a manual on all and everything. Now, that's my view. But we can extrapolate a lot. James, for example, when it comes to abortion, seems to forget not the first commandment. First commandment is to love your God, but the commandment to not kill. That applies to the unborn as much as it does to the elderly and everyone in between. We also have, I would argue, 2,000 years where the church has come to understand much more clearly its teachings, which means that we can speak very clearly on abortion, on euthanasia, on the nature of marriage. We can talk about, capitalism versus socialism, believe it or not, within the Christian tradition. We can talk about nuclear war. We can talk about just war. We can look at Ukraine and Russia, Gaza and Israel. We can look at all these things and make comments. Because actually the Bible, the Christian teachings, are not new. So James Tallarico, if you ever come across him, completely woke, completely idiotic. His Christian faith needs a lot of help and a lot of prayer. But as I say, if anyone starts telling you, well, such and such is not in the Bible, remember this from the Babylon Bee. Where in the Bible does it say Jesus is against people drop-kicking labradoodles? And I think instantly it shows the stupidity of the situation. Switching to New Zealand, this was in the paper last week, and I just wanted to touch on it quickly. So it was a long story in the paper about a New Zealand mother wanting to see bereavement leave rise from 3 days to 10 days. And I just wanted to quickly address it. And I suppose it's the former politician in me who wants just to quickly ask the question, well, where is the money coming from? And so I say this not with a lack of sympathy. Having lost 3 of my 4 parents, if you will, this including my parents-in-law, of course. So my father's passed away and Rachel's mum and dad have passed away. Others in the wider family. We've been through a lot of bereavement. And so it's not with a lack of sympathy to this woman's request or ask that maybe we move from 3 to 10 days bereavement leave. But why I put it here, it's one of the things I certainly came across in politics a lot. People somehow expect the state, or as we call it here, the Crown, to just have an unlimited supply of money for their wants and needs. And at the end of the day, and again, this reflects my politics, guys, and I'm obviously to the right, but I don't think we have the money to give people, every person, 10 days off when a loved one passes away. As I say, in the space of, I think, about 2 years, we lost 3 of our 4 parents. That would be almost 1 month if I'd followed this lady's suggestion off. That's a lot of time and it's a lot of money. So again, no lack of sympathy, I hope, for the woman involved. I'm sorry for her loss and losses, but I just worry at times that there are those in our society who think the taxpayer is just an endless ATM machine, that those of us watching and listening can just continue to pour out more and more money into more and more things. And a counterexample to this is I'm actually quite pleased to see the government moving to give women who have had given birth, so new mums, 3 days, up to 3 days in hospital. At the moment they give birth and they sort of push you out the door quicker than you can blink. But actually 3 days makes sense, I think, even more so than in bereavement, to actually put the funding there. But again, everything costs money. Everything costs money. And Fourth Adam is saying, Granddad dying at 93 is different from your spouse and children getting killed. Oh, absolutely. I think there can be some extreme examples. And that's important. But I don't think we can legislate for that, would still be my point. At which point, how do you put that in the law to say, well, look, we'll give you 3 days for an elderly grandparent, or we have to define what old is. And then we say, well, if you lose your spouse, is that 10 days? Or does it have to be your spouse and children? Does it have to be the spouse and children and something tragic? I see how it slips. So I suppose this is hard, very hard-ass Simon here, which is saying I just don't see how we do this. I think we just need to be, as a community, able to wrap further support around people who are going through terrible tragedies. Because, of course, even if we were to try and make distinctions between partners and spouses and children, grandparents and parents, you would instantly be dragged in front of the Human Rights Commission for discriminating, and it just becomes carte blanche. So again, there's no lack of sympathy to people who are going through bereavement, but I just don't know about this constant handout, expecting everyone else to pay for things. Good morning to Scylla, lovely to have you there as well. Food Dogs Trucking is saying that politicians they do. Actually, that's a really good point. They can do, except they're not getting any new entitlements. It's one of the actually quirky things I might quickly put. MPs don't get paid in the way that you guys normally do, insofar as there are no contracts, there is no holidays strictly for MPs. There's no sick leave, there's no bereavement leave, no nothing. And now that's no complaint, just a reflection on the reality. So if an MP is sick, there's no sick pay. So we get paid, or I should use it in the past tense for me, we got paid a wage, whether you were working or were sick, whether you were bereaved or whatever else. So that, I think, important for people to know, whereas, of course, in your own working environment, you can be granted, often people get 10 days of sick leave a year and so on. Now, there are exceptions to that. We've had the very sad news of Mark Cameron. He's an ACT MP. He actually lost his son to suicide in the last 2 years, but he himself has had kidney failure. And just as he was about to get a transplant, he's had heart issues, which means he can't get them now, and he's stepping away from Parliament. But he'd be an example of someone who's been away for Parliament for quite some time. But in the discussion that we're having here, they don't, how would you put it? They don't get sick leave. It's just that they're getting paid and not at work. So yeah, there's all of that. Yeah. And then actually Lisa makes a good point. This has become much more of a debate than, well, not debate, discussion. Yeah, you can dip into your annual leave. And great comment from Fourth Adam. Yeah, there's some MPs that send you on permanent leave. That is quite true. Some they could argue for years, if not decades. Yeah, Lisa's right. You can dip into your annual leave. I mean, again, I want to underline the point before I move on. It's not that we shouldn't have a lack of sympathy for people who are bereaved, and there could be some terrible situations. But there's always, I've found, and maybe I'm jaded from my political years, there's always a belief that somehow everyone else is going to be able to pay for it. And good morning, Kim. Lovely to have you along. Look at that smile in that picture. By the way, I know Kim, to all the other listeners. So Kim, lovely to have you along this morning. Just as a quick side note, Louisa Wall and I wrote last week an op-ed which the Post published. It's around the 4 MPs that were sanctioned by China. She and I quickly drafted a response, and actually thanks to the Post for publishing. We sent to actually, what am I thinking? We had so many, actually, we sent this to most of the mainstream media. It's interesting that only the Post picked it up. So 2 former MPs actually talking and pushing back on the China front. So 4 MPs sanctioned for visiting Taiwan. We thought that was outrageous that it happened, and within this op-ed, again thanks to the Post for publishing, we argue very strongly that the Parliament needs to do this week and make some very serious statements. In fact, Jerry Brownlee needs to get off his seat and actually speak up for the rights of our MPs. They are allowed to travel, meet and talk with whoever they want, and that needs to be defended by the Speaker. So I'll be watching that very closely today to see whether he says anything. If he doesn't, then he's more siding with the Chinese, which I think is deeply inappropriate. And I'd like to see a statement from Winston Peters or the Prime Minister in Parliament as well. Louisa and I also give some other suggestions. We'd love to see the MPs have an urgent debate on this. At day's end, our democracy relies on some very ancient privileges, and those include free speech. They include the freedom of association, the freedom of movement. So that's important. So you can check that out on the Post, or you can just jump over to my Substack. I also publish, and I can't find it, it doesn't really matter, but I write frequently, as people know, on Substack. So there's a free copy for you there, which is really good. Yeah, anyway, very good. So looking at the comments as things fly on by as well. You know me, I always get distracted. So check that out. This is a small aside, but I just thought it was very indicative of why I've got so little time for the UN and its utterly contemptible bias. So the UN chief last week As you know, there's the continuing conflict in the Middle East, Iran, Israel, and the US, but of course it's flowed into southern Lebanon because it's controlled by the Islamic terrorist group Hezbollah. But why I wanted to put this up is, I don't know about yourselves, in that whenever something is done by Israel, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is always very quick to call it Israel. Always. Without fault. If ever Israel's done something wrong, and it does do things wrong, the UN and the Secretary General, without hesitation, claim it's Israel. The funny thing is, when you read this, and maybe you're reading it at the moment if it's not too small for you, it's clearly this is Hezbollah. This is clearly the terrorist group. But Guterres cannot and never can bring himself to talk about them. So you notice what's happening in the absence when it comes to the UN, as I say, very quick to condemn Israel. But if it's not Israel, if it's Iran or Hamas, if it's Hezbollah, it's never mentioned, which is why then you know that it's them. Anyway, it's a small side note, and there's Foo Dogs Trucking and say they're going broke, yeah, which is by and large good. By and large good. And so why I say that is it's important. I think the UN does some good work, but unfortunately, like a lot of institutions in the West, it's been caught and captured. And as Scylla is saying, this is around the China question, it's up for us to decide, not China. That's exactly right. China can think that Taiwan is part of their country, and that's what we acknowledge. If you ever hear the one China policy, be really clear what that means, because the pro-China advocates, obviously the CCP itself, but also those in New Zealand who myself and others like to call the useful idiots, who buy into the CCP propaganda. The one China policy is not New Zealand saying that the Chinese communists should control Taiwan. I want to repeat that. The one China policy does not and has never meant that New Zealand agrees that the CCP should control, own or run Taiwan. We recognise the CCP as the government of China. We also recognise that Taiwan exists. The really important nuance here is that we say to China, yes, we hear you. When you say to us that you believe you control China, we go, yes, we understand that's what you say. We don't agree with it. It's a diplomatic fudge. It's what we've done since the 1970s along with other countries. So look, it's a very small and simple thing to say, but New Zealand does not recognise that China should be running and controlling Taiwan. Now, we dance a very tight rope there. We don't recognise Taiwan as a fully independent country, and you see that in our diplomatic space. We have a Chinese ambassador, but we don't strictly have a Taiwanese ambassador. Joanne Ho, who I know, she is the representative from Taiwan. It's small things. It's small things that make the difference. But again, if anyone says to you, oh, the one China policy says that New Zealand agrees that Taiwan is part of China and should be run by the CCP, that is not what the policy is. It's very often misunderstood and misconstrued. And Simply Green saying a diplomatic fudge. It is. It's just one of those ways that both sides can sort of feel that, I don't know, they're both winning. But look, MPs from New Zealand are allowed and should be allowed to visit whoever they want, which I think is important. Hey, in very small but good news, this is Queensland. So a new hospital, it's called the Mater, or Mother. It's run, well, it's a Catholic hospital, long and short, refusing to do abortions and coming under heavy fire, but holding their ground. Interestingly, the Mater Hospital, the Calvary Hospital in the ACT was shut down last year by the government. It's a Catholic hospital as well, refused to be involved with the likes of abortions and euthanasia. In the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, I've got distracted by a really good question by Simply Green is saying, are you telling me that our leaders don't agree but they say they do? Not quite. They acknowledge what each other's saying, but they're not necessarily agreeing. That's the key point, eh? We've got to remember acknowledgement versus agreement. They're two different things. So each side acknowledges that the other side has a view. They don't necessarily agree with it. As I say, you could call it a fudge. It's very subtle, Very subtle. Hey, yeah, two things is I think it's really good. Really good. That this hospital is holding its ground, and we need more hospitals like that. But as I say, the earlier example coming out of the ACT, that's where Canberra is, literally a Catholic hospital was seized and taken over by the state because it refused to do abortions. I mean, just let that sink in for a moment. And then, keeping with New Zealand, I came across an article by Alex Penk. Now, you might know Alex's name. He's part of what they call the Ethos Alliance. I've had him on the podcast before. Lovely guy, a lawyer. He doesn't practice as a lawyer now, but stands up for people's conscience rights. And long and short, and I'll put this up, he was writing about the state of the army at the moment because he's been doing some OIAs after there was the release, I don't know if you followed months ago, a new bicultural policy in the New Zealand Army that the New Zealand had to embrace Te Ao Māori, and that our army had to spend a lot of time learning karakia and waiata and so forth. And Alex was interested in this because, well, if you don't believe in the Māori gods or other gods, and you're a Christian, for example, gosh, or a Muslim or a Sikh or a Hindu, it doesn't matter. Has the army even considered your conscience rights? And the long and short is it hasn't. And look, the government of the day has put all of this program, I believe, on ice, or at least some of it. But I thought it was fascinating what he came up with. And I'm worried on two levels. Because firstly, Alex exposes that actually the conscience rights of individuals, and I'm going to use particularly Christians here, because that's where I can speak from, are being compromised. The army now is invoking a variety of pagan gods. You can see that at the top. As you guys know, I have no time for paganism. I think it's had its day. It's intellectually unsatisfying. It's not. Well, there's a whole host of reasons. As Fourth Adam saying, it's total crap. I was trying to avoid bad language, which I tend to have. But look, it's total BS, and the army's embracing it fully. So first and foremost, it breaches conscience rights. People are allowed to think and believe what they want. So look, if a soldier wants to believe that there is Papatuanuku really and Ranganui and all of this, look, all power to them. I just think it's just stupid. To be able to put it really simply, they're allowed to believe it. But Christians in this case, or Muslims and others, should not be forced to be invoking pagan gods. But the second approach is I want our army to be training for war, not to fight as in the aggressive sense, but maybe to be in the defensive. So when I say for war, I'm not here a warmonger. But I want them training. I want them to be able to use the Mars light weapon better. But no, our senior military leaders have been told that they have to understand more of Te Ao Māori. They need to embrace karakia and waiata. In fact, the more senior you become, you need to spend more time learning to speak Māori. Now look, I'm all for people learning other languages and cultures, and obviously Māori in New Zealand holds a more special place. But I don't want our army wasting time on this space. I want them training to be better fighters. I want them to be better people in the humanitarian space. So this is just, again, very frustrating, but it's also indicative, guys, of what's actually becoming quite wrong throughout our institutions. And the rot is coming in from a variety of angles. Not only is it this particular example that we're spending all this time, as I see people mentioning, sort of cultural brainwashing and actually putting enormous money and time and effort into areas which don't really accord with what's happening. But you've also got, and this granted is from the UK, but you've also got this case where Christians are being harassed out of the public square because of this their view. So this is a guy called Luke Salmons. He's actually just won his court case, but he was a police officer who was being forced through the DEI and anti-racism training, which is quite topical at the moment because, of course, many are arguing in the United Kingdom that it's all of that anti-racism training in response to Black Lives Matter, the DEI and all of this, which has actually led to the killing of and the appalling treatment of Henry Noack. He was the 18-year-old stabbed by Vikram Dewa, I think his name was, stabbed multiple times. But when the police arrived, the police didn't believe the young 18-year-old Henry bleeding out, saying, "I can't breathe." They instead believed the young Sikh man because he said the Henry was racist. Now, all of that was untrue. There was no racist intent. This guy just killed him. But the police, because they're being brainwashed in the UK, decided racism is more important than being stabbed to death. So importantly, this police officer is speaking up. Now, he's been in trouble for years because in his case, he was attending basically a brainwashing from the Muslim network within the police. And when he questioned some elements around Islam, he got into trouble. Not at the time, interestingly. The person holding the court, telling them that it's all perfectly fine, Islam is a religion of peace, nothing to see here, when he questioned elements of this, including as a Christian, of why he needs to go through indoctrination in another religion. At the time, no problem, but all of a sudden, he was being hauled in front of his superiors. And we're seeing that, sadly, more and more here in New Zealand now. The weaponisation of codes of conduct, where actually if you don't adhere to your corporation's view, again on the treaty, on Māori issues, whatever, certainly woke issues, think around transgenderism, use of pronouns, you get hauled before HR. And that's what happened to Luke. Now, he's won his court case. He's not going to go back to the police. But you can see in his case and in others, both here in New Zealand and elsewhere, and it's something very dangerous, guys. In fact, I sit down with a guy called Gavin Ashenden. He's a former Anglican priest. He's actually become a Catholic, but he's a very strong cultural commentator in the UK, Gavin Ashenden. And he and I actually sat down late last night and did a podcast. He's warning very strongly of how the Christian worldview and our democratic structures, so again, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, our institutions are being undermined. And he argues from sort of a pincer movement from neo-Marxism and Islam and his thought, pouring and pushing into society. And you have to see it in this case here. You're allowed to push back and question other religions. You're allowed to question your own religion. But for Luke, that wasn't allowed. With our army now, again, the Wokarati have taken over in many ways, it seems. The army is spending more time worrying about waiata and karakia than how to fire straight. We know in a lot of our government departments, enormous amounts of time are put aside to basically be, worrying about trans issues and pride events and so on. It's just not appropriate. It's not what we are expecting of our institutions. But the really important part is people are being forced into these, are being compelled into these. And that's just not right. It's not right, not proper, and we've got to keep speaking up and against it. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm conscious of the time, guys. I see all the wonderful comments coming through. Thank you for those who are spelling me the Novak. I know this is, Simply Green is putting up, with something actually Bob and I were talking about the other day. We see it spelt with a W, but it's more of a V sound. So I'm assuming Simply Green, probably the etymology is Polish, would it be? Novak? But I mean, exceptionally sad. It said 18-year-old stabbed. It's harrowing to watch the video as he is handcuffed, bleeding out, and saying to the police, "I've been stabbed, I can't breathe." They don't believe him, and they don't believe him because they've been brainwashed by all this anti-racism nonsense, that actually they turned to the murderer and said, "Oh, well, because you are Sikh in this case, are of a different skin colour, we're going to believe you." Pat is saying, just as we finish, same as education, my concerns of government and funding the Christian schools having an undue influence. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's totally a problem in the education system, and it's beginning to have an influence into the integrated school. So that is the Christian school. It's not so much through the money side. I mean, it always has an influence, but I saw when I was in Parliament law changes which are beginning to play. And so the Labour government, for example, put a clause, and I can't remember it verbatim, but the clause basically says that schools need to be safe spaces. And this is part of a double speak, and actually Gavin Ashenden and I talk about this. It's a double speak, because at one level you go, oh, of course you want schools to be safe for your kids. I mean, who wouldn't? But what does it actually mean in the law when all of a sudden the trans activist parents say, actually, my child doesn't feel safe at school because the other kids don't think that he's a girl? Or actually, in a Catholic school or a Christian school, someone was saying they believe marriage is between a man and a woman. Oh, well, no, that makes this kid over here feel unsafe. So you can see where the dangers start. And so very important that, as I keep saying to people, that you be aware of what is being taught to your children and grandchildren. Do keep an eye on it all. That's the key advice. Guys, I better leave it there. As I say, Bob will be back tomorrow. We've got Daybreak on Wednesday, and again on Thursday. Of course, we've got, and I always seem to lose it, doesn't really matter. Obviously, political playback on Thursday. A reminder, I'm pressing the wrong buttons everywhere. What am I doing? There we go. Family Matters. One of the latest is with Annie O'Brien. We talk about what is a woman. Annie is amazing. If you don't follow her writings already, she's fantastic. She calls a spade a spade. So check that out. Obviously, got political playback, as I say, on Thursday. You can be going and checking out my and Bob's Substacks. Just go and look up our names. We've got Counterculture. Look, there's just so much going on, guys. It is not funny. But as I say, have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me here on Solid Ground. See you again on Thursday morning.